Hi everyone, welcome to this week's webinar. My name's Josh and today I'm going to be utilizing the MWF floor module to showcase how to utilize marker lines in order to create blocking, strapping, or hole series in your floor panel. So I'm just going to jump right in and take a look at how I've got this file set up before I jump into how to create the marker lines and blocking. So I had two Revit floors which I created two floor panels from. You'll see floor panel 2, floor panel 3. I do have some joist lapping here. I utilized that from this tool here, joist lapping. I do have a Revit beam right below, and that's associated to a level right below the floor joists. It is touching in geometry, so then MWF knows that this beam is supporting this floor. And I also have a Revit wall, no MWF components in it yet, and that's attached to the Revit floor as well. So now MWF knows that these elements are associated in some way to this floor. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I have to create a couple different bridging types and hole series. So I'm going to be in my floor module. You can get to there through this MWF icon and switch to your floor module. And then underneath tools, you can select bridging types. I'm going to delete this example that I have, and I'm going to create new. I'm going to create a blocking. So let's say 2 by 10 blocking. Let's say at every bay. And say OK. Let's create another one called continuous. We'll say 2 by 10 by 10. Continuous every bay. And we'll create another one in another way. I just want to show you two different ways of creating these bridging types. But let's take a look at this 2 by 10 blocking at every bay. First thing we're going to want to do, I'm showcasing this through using a wood panel floor, so all dimensional lumber families. So I'm going to switch the family type to be dimensional lumber, make sure that I have my type set as 2 by 10. Maybe you need to load in some different families. You can do that through the Insert tab through Revit, but I've preloaded these families in for the webinar. I can also specify the vertical reference point for that structural framing member. I'm going to leave that as centerline, just keep it at default. I'm also going to add a stagger, so maybe a 1-inch stagger. This is similar to your horizontal members tool in your wall module. When you're adding horizontal members to your floor or to your wall panel, you can add a stagger with an offset. This is the same idea. The cutback offset here allows you to specify different cutbacks for specific bays if you prefer. So maybe this would be more utilized in an LGS situation. So I'm just going to leave this as 0 and keep this as default. You can also specify your spacing. So maybe you want your blocking to show up every other bay or every third bay. In that case, what you'd do is say every third bay, which would place a member, skip 2, and then place another member. If I had it at every other bay, it would place a member, skip a member, place a member, skip a member, and so on. And you can go through and specify how many bays you need it to do. So for us, for this demonstration, I'm going to leave it at every bay because I'm working with small panels. So every bay makes sense for this example. If you're working in LGS, you can specify your different cutbacks. Maybe you're actually working with a wood panel and you're using actually we could specify, let's switch to rectangular. We're going to keep our cutbacks at 1, so we want the blocking to actually stop at the joists, and we don't want it to overlap the joists. So we're going to leave these at their default. But if you are working with LGS, you could switch to the different profiles. You get a little graphic of what the cutback plane setting actually is. So it just, these numbers correspond with your diagram here. In our case, we're going to keep this to rectangular and keep it at plane 1. You can also add a strap to the top, the bottom, both, or one or the other. What this does, it'll place a strapping member in line with your blocking on the either below the joist or above the joist, and you get to choose the family. So maybe you want 2x4, but in our case, we're just going to, I'm actually going to showcase strapping in a different way, and I don't want it to align with my blocking here. I'm not worried about that. So I'm going to uncheck these and just leave this as a basic blocking configuration. The continuous, I'll switch over to the bridging type continuous that I created. And then under family, I want that to be a dimensional number. I'm going to say 2x10 is good. My reference point, I'm good with keeping it as the center line, and I'll keep the rotation at 180. That means that it'll be in the same orientation as my joists, but running perpendicular. And I can specify whether I want it to be considered a strap or blocking by MWF. I'm going to say blocking because it's going to be running through my joists. Now, the difference, if I created new, the difference between continuous and blocking will be 1 every bay, continuous will continue straight through each joist, and it will actually overlap and kind of create a clash there. So I'm going to cancel out of here. I've already created the continuous, and I'll say OK. So now I want to apply that to my floor panels. I'm going to utilize floor panel 2. This has a little more complexity to it, has the wall below it, the beam below it as well. I'm going to open up my Pro Suite. You might have Pro Wood or Pro Metal, but go into your markers and you create marker lines when you have your panel selected. So here I get a couple different options by default. I can specify at wall support. Notice I can check multiple items here, by the way. So just to showcase what each does and have it be very clear, I'm going to use at wall support. What this is going to do is it's going to create a marker line right in line with the wall that's below it, saying that's a supporting wall, and we're going to draw a marker line that you can apply your either bridging or your whole series to, but it'll only create the one wall line there, not a series of lines. I could also specify at beam support, which would create one centered above the I-beam that I have in there. I could specify at panel start, at panel end, or regular spacing, or all of the above. In this case, we're just going to start with at wall support. I'm going to turn off the assign joist stiffener, but I do want to show you the options here. You can specify whether it's on the outside of the stud, inside, both studs, or if it's a joist stiffener with outside stud, or both studs. You have some invert options. You could specify the stud family and the stiffener family and the stiffener length. But again, in this case, we're not dealing with whole series, so we don't need any stiffeners at the moment. So I'll cancel out of that and turn off the joist stiffener. Under bridging types, if I select this drop-down, I'm going to see those two bridging types that I created in that other menu. I'm going to select the continuous for every bay, and this is going to add a continuous member right above this wall. That's how this menu reads. It's a 2x10 bridging type above the wall. So if I say OK, it's going to create this line for me. it hasn't drawn in or modeled it yet. Similar to when you create a floor, you need to regenerate. So I'll select any member of the floor and say regenerate. And you'll see that's the clash I was telling you about where it's overlapping. And it's one continuous member from the start to the end of the panel. If I go into my top view, you can see it's aligned with the center of the wall below. And if I select the actual model line, I can actually move that if I want. Maybe I'm going to move it down to be one side of the wall. And then I could regenerate. And it will follow that line. Now that also means that we could have a slight diagonal and regenerate. And it will follow that line. So to show the other option of using it above the beam, I'm going to go into my markers. So I've selected my floor panel, create marker lines, and instead of the wall support, I'll uncheck that and say at beam support. And in this case, I'm going to select the 2x10 blocking at every bay. So that'll have a blocking member in every bay. And remember, we added the stagger to it as well. And we assign that cutback. So I'm going to say OK. And you'll notice this line now popped up. So in order to see what that actually did, I can regenerate. And now if I go to my top view, I believe I set a 1-inch offset with the stagger, and it's aligned to the center of this I-beam below. I could move the line if I prefer. If I want to add a diagonal to it, I can do that too. Just keep in mind, as you make those modifications, regenerate your panel. Alright, so there's one more way that you can create your bridging types. So if I select my panel one more time, actually I'm going to use my floor panel 3 for this example. And I'm going to go into my markers, create marker lines. And then I'm going to uncheck at beam support and use regular spacing. I'm going to start creating a strapping option here. That's my end goal. So I'm going to say maybe my first offset is going to be 3 feet, and my spacing is every 2 feet. That's great. If I did have a benchmark in the project, I could select it here, and then it would base the spacing off of that benchmark. In this case, I'm just leaving it as none. I don't have a benchmark actually placed in this. So yeah, I'm going to leave that as none. I can assign joist stiffeners, I can assign lifting toggles if I need, but in this case, I'm looking at my drop-down menu and I don't see my strapping option here. So I need to create one. Instead of exiting out of here and going into my bridging types, I can hit Manage here, and I can create a new one through this. It's the same menu, it's the same dialog box, except for I'm accessing it through my Create Marker Lines tool. So instead of using continuous every bay, because you'll notice that that aligned it to the center and there's no offset feature, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create new and use notched member. And I'm going to say 2x4 strapping. And I'll just leave it at that because I'm not going to specify that spacing, because the spacing is actually specified in the marker lines here. So I'll say OK here. And it'll say, do I want to add it to the top, to the bottom, or both? You could check off both and specify the families if you need. In this example, I'm just going to do on the bottom. I'll specify the family being a dimensional lumber, 2x4. I'm not going to apply any whole series just because I'm actually going to add an offset here. So an offset from the bottom of the joist, 1.5 inches. If I didn't add that offset, it would overlap with the joist, similar to this continuous option, except for it'll be on the bottom of the joist or the bottom of the panel. So I'll say OK here. Actually, I'll create two different types just to showcase what that offset does. So I'll say 2x4 strapping, no offset, just to show the difference. And it's going to be a notched member as well. So I'll do all the same settings here except for no offset. You can see the difference. And I'll say OK. So the first one I'm going to choose is the one without the offset, just to show you. And I'll say OK. And it'll populate with a series of lines with the spacing I've assigned. So this from here to here is your 3 feet. You'll see the temporary dimension pop up here. And then it's every 2 feet has a marker line placed. To see that populate in my panel, I would say regenerate. And you'll see how it overlaps. So I could have specified a whole series in there as well, and then it would actually notch my members, notch these joists. But I was just showing you quickly there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch these. I'm going to Control Z and undo. And I'm going to apply the one with the offset because I want it placed on the bottom of the joist and not notch in. So I'm going to create marker lines. Do regular spacing. We'll say the same settings. So the first stud offset being 3 and then every 2 feet. And because I did Control Z, it undid my my blocking type here. So I'll create new notched members, 2x4 strapping. Oops, rename strapping. I'm going to add a bottom member, say dimensional lumber, 2x4 with 1.5 inch offset from the bottom. Keep in mind this offset is based on the top or the bottom. So if I said dimensional lumber here, 2x4, I would do 1.5 inch offset from the top in order to do the same thing on the top. I'm just going to leave it at the bottom and say OK. Select my strapping and say OK. And regenerate. So now I have my strapping running through the bottom of my joist. And I could always copy these lines, which is a nice feature. So maybe I want one near the end there, and then I could regen. Maybe I wanted another one over here, and I could regenerate. Oh, select your panel and regenerate. So then you can modify your strapping. Again, it's the same as the other two examples I showed you. If you wanted to do an angle, you can do an angle through it. And I'll regenerate that. Alright. So another one that I want to show you is whole series, applying whole series to the panels. So let's go into MWF Tools. We're still in the floor module, and I'm going to say Project Whole Series. I don't have any created yet, so I'm going to say Create New. And this is kind of a simplified version of the whole series from the wall module. Similar idea of creating the different hole types, except for it doesn't have the pattern like every bay or vertical, horizontally spaced, whatever. This is just creating your shape, essentially. So you have the round, rectangular, rectangular void, round void, slot, or if you have just a specific one from your CNC, you could specify just the CNC code. In our case, I'm just going to do a quick round hole here. Do 2-inch diameter round hole. And I'm going to say OK. Now, similar to my bridging types, some settings pop up on the side for me. I could specify an offset from the center of the marker line. I could specify my CNC code. In this case, I'm just going to specify my 2-inch diameter and say OK. Alright, so now we want to apply that to the panels. We go about it the same way. We go select our panel, we say marker lines, create marker lines, and we could specify whether we want it to be at wall support, at beam support, the panel start, or the panel end. I'm going to use regular spacing again, but we're going to increase the spacing, maybe like 4 feet. First offset 4 feet. Again, I don't have a benchmark to apply. And I'm going to turn off my bridging type and assign the 2-inch diameter round hole. Keep in mind, you could apply both at the same time, but if it would align along that line. So in this example, if I did the whole series, if I did the whole series and the continuous blocking here, then you wouldn't actually see the whole series because it would overlap with the blocking. So this example, I'm just going to use just the whole series. This is the same as the bridging types, where if I needed to create another whole type, I could select manage. It opens up the whole series menu where I could create new ones, modify them, rename them, whatever I need, and say OK. And then it would populate in this list. So let's do an example here. Let's do another round hole. We'll say a 3-inch diameter. And say OK. Make our modification. Say OK. And now it'll show up in our dropdown. Again, I'm still going to use the 2-inch diameter round hole. And I will say OK. So you'll notice 2 marker lines populated. This one you're going to see the round hole probably clash a little bit with this blocking here, but we'll address that after. So I'll say regenerate. And I've got my whole series running through my joists. You'll see here I've got a little clash. It applied the whole series also to the blocking member here. So again, that's just because I added this on a diagonal. If I change that marker line and I say I want that to be straight across again and then regenerate, I could do something like that. So that's an overview look at creating and applying bridging types and whole series and using your Create Marker Lines tool with your floor panels and how you can modify them. You can move around your strapping members. You can apply different whole series. You can create a bunch of different patterns. So you'll notice that I actually utilized the tool 3 different times in this panel. I utilized it once for the wall panel below, and I wanted this member to align with the wall below. I also created one for the I-beam. I wanted blocking to align with the I-beam above, or below, sorry. And then I created another one for this whole series to run through. So you can apply different marker line, like creating marker line patterns. You can apply it multiple times to a floor panel. You can assign different bridging types. Maybe you want to do squash blocks, or you need some joist support throughout the panel. You could utilize some different settings throughout the tools that we just kind of did a breeze through of. So if I went into my marker line, or sorry, into my tools, and I went bridging types, I could create maybe squash blocks, or utilize the notch member with the whole series. So if I created a whole series, say notch, just to show you the settings, you could apply the whole series to it. So now 3-inch diameter round hole, that doesn't match up the shape, but just to give you an example, And the last thing that I want to showcase regarding the marker lines, specifically the marker lines, this applies for both whole series and bridging types. You can actually modify where the line stops. So now that I've created all these different marker lines, I could say maybe this piece of strapping is fine to stop here. Let's stop one in the middle of the bay. I want to show you what happens there. And we'll do another one back here. And I will regenerate. So you'll see it stops at the closest member. So in this case, this did extend past, but the line finishes closer to this member than this member. So then it aligns and terminates this piece of strapping at this joist member. Same thing happened up here, same thing down here. And this way you could assign, maybe you only need blocking within a couple of the bays. You could modify those model lines or marker lines to correspond with your needs. This is the same for whole series as well. I'll just showcase that. And I will say regenerate, select my panel, regenerate. And you'll notice the whole series stops at this joist here. So that's a quick overview of how to create project bridging types, project whole series in your floor panels, and also apply or create marker lines and create them in patterns or for your to align to the walls below, the beams below. Maybe you need it as a spacing pattern or align to a benchmark. And that's a quick overview of how to use that tool. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I hope you have a great day. Please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. Bye for now.